funeral of Adigun the trader moved exactly as every funeral in Isanya had moved for generations. Mourners wailing in practiced rhythm, drummers keeping the pace toward the grave. His wrapped body laid out on woven mats at the center of the compound, white cloth catching the midday sun, the smell of burning herbs thick in the air as the officiant moved through the final blessings before burial. The next moment, his hand twitched. Nobody saw it at first. Then his wife did, and her scream cut clean through the drumming, and every eye in the compound turned in time to watch the impossible happen in front of them. Adigun sat up, not stiff, not lurching, calm, deliberate, as though rising from an ordinary sleep. He looked out at the frozen crowd of mourners, drummers, elders, his own weeping daughter, and spoke in a voice that carried none of the wrongness his body should have carried. "I did not die of the fever," he said. "Someone made certain of that." Then he went still again, eyes open, waiting. For 3 full seconds, nobody in that compound moved or breathed. Then the world caught up with what had just happened, and it happened all at once. Chaos broke the compound wide open. Mourners scattered backward. Someone's drum clattered to the dirt. A child was snatched up and carried away, crying. Only a handful of people held their ground. His daughter Yetunde, frozen mid-step toward him, and Elder Fagbemi, the officiant of the rites, moving fast to reassert control over a ceremony that had just stopped obeying any rule he knew. Adigun's wife had already fainted into the arms of 2 other women, carried away weeping before she could even process what she'd witnessed. Adigun's trading partner, Kunle, stood frozen near the compound wall, his face drained of all color. Near the gate, Lanre, a broad-shouldered rival trader who had come only out of obligation, not grief, watched with an expression that would, within the hour, be read by an entire village as guilt, though in this moment it was only shock, plain and human. Yetunde alone moved toward the body, rather than away from it, dropping to her knees beside her father, searching his open eyes for something, recognition, warmth, anything, and finding only that same eerie, waiting stillness. Adigun's wife returned to the compound sooner than anyone expected, refusing to be kept from her husband's side, no matter how strange or frightening he had become. She knelt across from Yetunde, taking her husband's cold hand in both of hers, and when his voice spoke again, she did not flinch the way others did. She leaned closer instead, as though 17 years of marriage had taught her not to be afraid of him, even now, even like this. "Tell them plainly," she said to him, quiet enough that only those nearest could hear. "Whatever it costs you to say it. I would rather bury the truth than bury a lie dressed up as peace." "Everyone back," Fagbemi commanded, spreading his arms, his officiant staff raised like a barrier between the crowd and the body. "This is not for common eyes. Clear the compound." He spoke, Yetunde said, refusing to move, staring at her father's open, unblinking eyes. "You all heard him. He said someone killed him." "Grief plays tricks," Fagbemi said, too quickly. "The body settles strangely sometimes. It means nothing." "It said words, Fagbemi. Grief does not speak sentences." "I have conducted more burial rites in this village than any man living," Fagbemi said, drawing himself up with practiced authority. "I have seen bodies twitch, seen breath escape, in strange sounds that frightened mourners into believing all manner of things. This is grief and shock working on frightened minds, nothing more. And I will not have my father's, your father's, rites turned into a spectacle over it." "Then explain the words plainly. If it was only sound," Yetunde shot back. "Sound does not accuse. Sound does not name a cup." Fagbemi had no immediate answer for that, and his silence, brief as it was, planted the first small seed of doubt in more than one mind besides Yetunde's own. An old woman, near the back of the compound, spoke the rule every person present already knew in their bones, the rule Fagbemi himself was supposed to be the one to invoke. "The sun," she said. "He must be buried before it sets, or his soul wanders unsettled forever. Look how high it still sits. We have time enough to do this properly, but not forever." All eyes went to the sky. Midday sun, already beginning its long, slow decline. The clock had started, and everyone in that compound felt it start at once. It had seemed, until this very moment, an ordinary death. Adigun had complained of fever 3 days prior, taken to his sleeping mat, weaker each night, and passed quietly before dawn on the 3rd. The kind of illness that swept through Isanya every dry season and claimed an unlucky few, mourned but never questioned. No one had thought to question it, because there had been nothing yet to question. Now, every one of those 3 days sat differently in the village's memory, re-examined in an instant for anything they might have missed the first time. Yetunde turned back to her father's body, kneeling beside him, despite her own mother's hand grabbing at her sleeve to pull her back. "Father, if you can still hear me, who did this?" For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Then Adigun's mouth opened again, slower this time, as though speaking cost him something real. "The last cup I drank," he said, "was not poured by a stranger's hand." The compound went utterly silent. Every person present understood exactly what that meant. Whoever killed Adigun was not some outsider, not some rival from another village. Whoever killed him had stood close enough to hand him a cup, trusted enough that he drank from it without a second thought. Slowly, without anyone saying it aloud, the crowd's eyes began moving across each other, across the people standing nearest the family, across every face that had shared Adigun's table in his final days. Nobody needed to be introduced to a suspect. The suspects were already standing in the compound. The compound itself seemed to shrink in that moment. Walls and gathered bodies pressing closer together, the safe distance of shared grief collapsing into something far more dangerous. The particular, watchful silence of people no longer mourning together, but measuring each other. "Lanre," someone said first, and the name spread through the crowd like dry grass catching fire. Lanre had the dispute with him, the boundary. Everyone knows they hadn't spoken peacefully in a season. Lanre, a broad-shouldered trader, standing near the compound's edge, went rigid as every eye turned toward him at once. "That dispute was over land, not blood," he said, backing up a step. "I would not poison a man over a boundary line." "You were seen near his compound the week before he fell ill," another voice pressed. "I was seen because I went to argue with him, not to kill him." There is a difference, and you are all choosing not to see it, because it is easier than looking at yourselves. "Easier than looking at ourselves for what?" a third villager demanded, stepping closer, voice rising with the rest of the crowd's fear. "You're the one with a grudge, standing at a dead man's funeral, Lanre, not the rest of us." "A grudge is not a knife," Lanre shot back. "And it is not poison in a cup either. I argued with that man, in the open market, where anyone could hear me, because I had nothing to hide. Ask yourselves, who among you argues with a man in daylight and then kills him in secret? Those two things do not belong to the same kind of person." Yetunde stepped forward, sharp and unwilling to let the crowd's fear decide this faster than the truth could. "Where were you the night before he first fell sick, Lanre?" "Exactly, not near enough. Exactly where?" Lanre hesitated, and that hesitation alone was enough for the crowd to start closing in around him, voices rising, hands reaching for him, despite no proof beyond a grudge and bad timing. "I was at my own compound," he finally said, quieter now, less certain, "alone. I have no one who can say otherwise, and I know exactly how that sounds." "It sounds like guilt," someone muttered. "It sounds like a man who lives alone," Landra said, "which is not the same crime. Whatever this crowd wants to believe tonight." A younger man near the front, Adigun's nephew, shoved forward suddenly, fists already clenched. "Enough talk. He argued with my uncle for a season, and now my uncle is dead. What more proof does anyone need?" Two other men moved with him, and for one dangerous moment, it seemed the compound might tip into violence before a single fact had actually been confirmed. Lanre backing against the compound wall, with nowhere left to retreat. "Stop!" Yetunde's voice cut through the surge, sharper than anyone had yet heard it that day. "If you touch him on nothing but a grudge and bad timing, and it turns out he is innocent, then this village buries two wrongs today, instead of solving one. Let my father finish what he started, before any of you decide his fate with your fists." The nephew hesitated, chest still heaving, but stepped back, and the crowd's fury settled, reluctantly, into an uneasy simmer rather than an explosion. Fagbemi, watching the crowd's fury build, stepped in, not to calm it, but to use it. If Landre is the one responsible, then justice can be swift, and the burial can proceed as it should have from the start. The sun does not wait for our comfort. "You want this finished," Yetunde said, turning to look at him directly, for the first time, with real suspicion in her eyes. "You wanted it finished, before he even spoke a second time. Why are you in such a hurry, Fagbemi?" "Because the law is the law," Fagbemi said, too smoothly. And I would rather see it honored than see this compound descend into a lynching over unproven accusations. It was, on its surface, a reasonable thing to say. But Yetunde noticed, the way a person notices a single wrong note in a familiar song, that his hurry had started well before Landre's name was ever spoken. If you think Landre is guilty, wait until you hear what the corpse says next. Subscribe now, because the sun is setting on this village, and the real killer is still standing in that crowd, smiling. Adigun's voice returned a third time, weaker now, forcing the crowd back into silence around him. The hand that poured my last cup, he said, ate my bread every day, argued with me over land, but never once, in all those arguments, stepped inside my compound after dark. The crowd turned back toward Lanre, and understanding rippled through them, almost as fast as the accusation had. Lanre had argued with Adigun in the open, publicly, at the market, in daylight, never once inside his home. Whoever killed Adigun had been inside his home, close enough to share his table, trusted enough to be let in after dark. It isn't him, Yetunde said, relief and fresh dread crashing into her at once. Lanre never once ate at my father's table. He's telling us that directly. Lanre exhaled like a man surfacing from underwater, and the crowd's fury, robbed of its target, began casting around for a new one. Slower this time, more painful, because the next name that came to every mind belonged to someone far closer to the family than a rival trader ever could be. Yetunde allowed herself one single breath before turning to face it, one hand pressed briefly against her own chest, as though physically holding herself together. She had wanted Landre to be guilty, she realized, wanted it selfishly, because a stranger's guilt would have been so much easier to carry than what she now suspected was coming. She did not have that mercy waiting for her. Kunle, she whispered, almost to herself, and the compound went quiet in a different way entirely. Kunle had been Adigun's closest friend for 20 years, his trading partner, a man who had sat at every meal in that compound more times than anyone present could count, a man Yetunde had called uncle since she was a child. He stood near the family now, close enough that the accusation, once spoken, landed on him like a physical blow. "You cannot mean that," Kunle said, his voice cracking. "I loved that man like a brother. We built our trade together, from nothing, the two of us. 20 years of splitting every profit and every loss down the middle." "You ate at his table every single day," Yetunde said, forcing herself to say the words, even as her own chest ached with the saying of them. "You are exactly who the cup was describing, Kunle. I don't want it to be you. I need you to understand that before I ask you anything else. But I need you to answer me honestly." Kunle's composure fractured slowly, visibly, under the weight of the whole compound stare. "There is a debt," he finally admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "Money I owed him, a large sum, unpaid for over a year. Our last trading season went badly for me, badly enough that I borrowed against next year's harvest just to keep my own family fed. And I borrowed it from him because I trusted he would be patient with me, the way a brother is patient." "Was he?" Yetunde asked. "Patient? He never once raised the debt with anger," Kunle said. "Not once." He asked after it, gently, the way you'd ask a friend about a wound that hadn't fully healed. "I know how that debt looks to all of you now, standing here with him, accusing someone from his own table. I know exactly how it looks. But I swear to you, Yetunde, on your father's own memory, I did not do this. I would have found a way to repay him. I was already finding a way." The crowd did not believe him easily. Motive, once spoken aloud, has its own terrible gravity, and Kunle felt every person in that compound pulling away from him, even as he pleaded his innocence. Old friends suddenly looking at him like a stranger. "He confessed it himself," someone called out. "A debt, a motive, and no witness for his own whereabouts either. What more do we need this time?" The same restless energy that had nearly turned on Landre began gathering again, hungrier now, impatient with a truth that kept refusing to arrive cleanly. Lanre, freshly cleared himself, stepped forward, this time, instead of shrinking back, placing himself bodily between Kunle and the tightening crowd. "I know exactly what it feels like to stand where he's standing," Lanre said, voice hard. "You were ready to tear me apart an hour ago on less than this. Give him the same patience my innocence bought me, or admit that patience was never really the point tonight." The sun dropped lower, throwing longer shadows across the compound floor, and Fagbemi pressed harder now, his officiant staff striking the ground for emphasis. We have a confessed debt, and a body that will not stay silent much longer. The right demands resolution before sundown, not endless questioning. Let us proceed. He confessed a debt, Yetunde snapped. Not a murder. Those are not the same thing, and you know it. Fagbemi, better than anyone in this compound, since you're the one who keeps reminding us of every rule, except the one that says we take our time to find the truth. Something in Fagbemi's expression flickered. Small, quickly hidden, but Yetunde caught it, and for the first time, she let herself truly wonder about the one man who had been present at every single ritual moment of her father's final days, who had arrived weeks earlier for what was supposed to be a minor blessing and simply never quite left. It was not only Yetunde who noticed. Adigun's wife, her weeping, mostly spent, watched Fagbemi urge the crowd toward burial with a strange new attentiveness. Kunle, still reeling from his own accusation, found his eyes drifting toward the officiant more than once, some old instinct stirring that he couldn't yet name. Even Lanre, freshly accused himself and desperate for the crowd's attention to land anywhere but on him, began watching Fagbemi's hurry with narrowed, calculating eyes. Adigun's body stirred again, and this time his voice came thinner, more strained, the words arriving slower, each one costing him visibly more than the last, as though something essential was draining out of him along with the daylight itself. Time, he managed. Both of us, running out of time. Like this video, right now, if you're starting to suspect what I'm suspecting, and comment who you think the real killer is, because the sun is nearly down, and once it sets, this truth goes into the ground with him forever. Yetunde felt the weight of both clocks pressing on her at once, the sun sinking steadily toward the horizon, and her father's voice growing weaker with every word he forced out. She stepped back from Kunle, from Lanre, from the crowd's noise entirely, and made herself think instead of react. Every meal, every private moment, every ritual cleansing in the days before her father fell ill. She forced herself to walk back through each one slowly, the way her father had once taught her to check a ledger, not by trusting memory, but by checking every entry against every other, refusing to let a single day pass unexamined. The morning blessing over the threshold. 3 weeks ago, Fagbemi had been there, newly arrived, staff in hand. The cleansing of the trading goods, before the season's first sale. Fagbemi again, murmuring over each item while her father watched, trusting, grateful for the extra devotion. The evening her father had complained of a strange bitterness in his water, and laughed it off as an old man's fussiness. She tried to remember who had drawn that water, and the answer arrived cold and certain. It had been left blessed and covered outside her father's door, that same morning, exactly as it was every morning, by the same steady hand. Every single memory carried the same quiet, constant presence at its edge, so familiar she had stopped truly seeing him at all. Not Kunle, not Lanre, but the man standing at the border of every scene, blessing the food, blessing the water, present for absolutely everything, and suspected of absolutely nothing, because nobody ever suspects the man holding the ritual staff. She thought too, unbidden, of her father teaching her, as a girl, to check every ledger twice, once for the numbers, once for the story the numbers were trying to tell. A column can be correct and still be lying to you, he used to say, if you only ever check the sum and never the pattern. She had thought it was a lesson about trade. She understood now, it was a lesson for exactly this moment, and she owed him the discipline of finishing what he'd started teaching her, even from the far side of his own death. Fagbemi, she said, and her own voice shook as she said it. You came for a small blessing, a month ago. You were meant to stay 3 days. You never left. The compound's attention, which had been split between Lanre and Kunle, turned as one toward the officiant standing at the center of the rites, his staff still raised, his face for the first time in the entire ceremony, caught without an answer ready. A murmur moved through the gathered crowd, uncertain and afraid in a new way now. Not the fear of a killer among strangers, but the fear of having trusted the wrong man for years, without ever once questioning it. Adigun's nephew, who had nearly struck Lanre only an hour before, now stood silent and ashamed, realizing how close his own fists had come to to punishing an innocent man, while the actual danger stood calmly beside the grave the entire time, staff in hand, blessing every cup. He blessed my wedding, one woman whispered to another. He blessed my child's naming. If he could do this to Adigun, who else? She didn't finish the thought. Nobody wanted to finish that thought out loud. Not yet, not with the sun nearly gone, and one final answer still hanging unspoken in the air. You were at every meal, Yetunde pressed, stepping toward him now, the crowd parting slightly to let her. What? You blessed every cup before it was poured. You had more access to my father every single day than Lanre or Kunle ever had in a year, and from the very first moment he spoke, you have done nothing but push this compound toward the grave before anyone could ask a single real question. You are grieving, Fagbemi said, too fast, too tight. Grief looks for someone to blame, and I understand that, but do not let it turn you against the very man conducting your father's rites. Answer her, Kunle said, finding his voice again, some of the crowd's suspicion visibly sliding off him and onto Fagbemi instead. If you have nothing to hide, answer the question plainly. Tell us where you were the night before he first fell sick. The same question your daughter asked me, and asked Lanre. It is only fair you answer it too. I was performing evening rites, Fagbemi said, as I do every night, as is my duty. Alone? Lanre asked, some of his own earlier fear hardening now into something sharper, aimed finally at someone other than himself. Convenient that the one man with no witness is also the one man with access to every cup in this compound. Fagbemi's staff trembled slightly in his grip, his composure fraying visibly at the edges for the first time since the ceremony began. You would accuse the officiant himself? On the word of a grieving girl and a fading corpse. He straightened, attempting one last time to summon the authority that had carried him through every previous accusation that day. I have served this village faithfully for longer than you have been trading, Lanre, longer than Yetunde has been alive. Do not let one strange afternoon undo a lifetime of devotion on nothing but suspicion. For a moment, it almost worked. A few older villagers shifted, uncertain, old habits of deference tugging at them even now. But Yetunde held her ground, unmoved by the appeal to years she hadn't lived, and trust she no longer felt obligated to extend. A lifetime of devotion does not explain why you are the only person in this compound, with no witness for the one night that matters, she said. I would accuse whoever the truth points to, and right now, Fagbemi, it is pointing directly at you, and has been, since before you even knew I was looking. The sun touched the horizon, throwing the whole compound into deep orange light, and Adigun's body, weaker now than it had been at any point since it first sat up, seemed to be waiting on the answer as much as anyone. He discovered something, Fagbemi finally said, the words tearing loose from him, like something long buried, finally breaking the surface. Weeks ago, he found the discrepancy in the communal offerings, money that should have reached the village's stores and never did. Money I had been quietly taking for years, small enough each time that no one ever noticed, until Adigun, of all people, actually checked the numbers himself. You killed him to stop him from telling the council, Yetunde said, understanding crashing over her all at once, cold and absolute. He was going to expose me at the very next gathering, Fagbemi said, and something in his composure, finally, completely broke. Everything I have built here, every bit of standing I have, gone. The moment he opened his mouth, I told myself it was a small thing, a little from every offering, spread thin enough that it would never truly hurt anyone. He was going to destroy me over a little thing. A little thing, Kunle repeated, disbelieving. You call 20 years of a man's trust a little thing. He fed you at his own table, Fagbemi. My debt to him was real coin, openly owed, and still he never once raised his voice at me for it. What did he ever do to you, besides catch you stealing? He gave me no choice, Fagbemi said, and even as he said it, the excuse sounded hollow, even to his own ears. The words of a man who had spent weeks rehearsing a justification that had never once actually held together. I asked him, privately, to let it go, quietly. I offered to repay every coin over time, in secret, if he would simply say nothing. He refused. He said the council deserved the truth more than I deserved his silence. He was right, Yetunde said, her voice shaking with a grief that had finally found somewhere honest to land. He was right, and you killed him for being right. It was never a little thing, Adigun's voice said, and every head snapped back toward the body. Speaking now, with what was clearly the last of whatever strength remained in it. It was my death, Fagbemi. There is nothing little about that. Fagbemi's mask shattered entirely at the sound of his own victim's voice, condemning him directly, in front of the whole gathered village, in a testimony no ritual authority could spin or delay. For one terrible moment, he looked exactly like what he was, a cornered man with nothing left to lose. The sun is setting, he said, voice climbing toward panic now, staff raised, not in ceremony but in threat. The right demands burial now, this instant, son or no son, silence him permanently, and none of this matters anymore. Stand aside. He lunged toward the grave's edge, staff swinging wide, forcing the nearest mourners to scramble backward out of his path. Yetunde threw herself between him and the open earth, without a second's hesitation, arms spread the same way his had been at the very start of all this, and for one suspended moment, it seemed he might strike her down, simply to reach the grave first. Then Kunle moved, then Lanre. Then a dozen other hands, that only hours earlier had been ready to accuse each other of murder, closing ranks instead around Fagbemi, seizing his staff, pulling him back from the grave's edge, with a unity the compound hadn't shown all day. You don't get to bury this, Yetunde said, breathless, staring him down as the last edge of the sun slipped below the horizon behind them. Not tonight, not ever again. Fagbemi struggled once, twice, against the hands now holding him firmly in place. Kunle's grip among them, steady and certain for the first time since his own name had been cleared. Lanre's beside him, the two men who had spent the entire afternoon as suspects, now standing together as the ones who finally caught the truth. Then, all at once, the fight went out of Fagbemi entirely, leaving only a broken man in an officiant's robes, exposed in the very compound he had tried to control until the very last second of daylight. The sun finished setting fully as the struggle ended, and Adigun's body, its purpose finally served, went still, not with the wrongness of before, but with something closer to peace, eyes closing on his own terms, rather than the rituals. Fagbemi was restrained through the night by the same community he had spent the entire day trying to manipulate, held until the proper authorities could be summoned at first light. Nobody in Isanya slept soundly that night, but for the first time since the drums had stopped mid-beat, the silence in the compound felt like relief rather than dread. When the district authorities arrived at dawn to take Fagbemi away, the village elders who remained stood in a solemn line to witness it, and not one of them spoke in his defense. The man who had spent years commanding their trust with a ritual staff left Isanya in silence, stripped of the very authority he had killed to protect. Lanre stayed until dawn, not out of obligation anymore, but out of something closer to belonging, helping prepare the grave he had almost been wrongly blamed for filling with murder rather than mourning. Kunle sat beside Yetunde through the long night, saying little, needing to say little. The debt between him and Adigun's memory settled now, in a way no repayment ever could have managed on its own. Adigun was buried the following dawn, properly, truthfully, his name finally cleared of the fever that had never actually killed him. The drums played without interruption this time, the rites completed in full by a different, humbler officiant, nothing left unsettled or unspoken between the living and the dead. Yetunde stood at the fresh grave long after the other mourners had gone, her mother's hand resting on her shoulder, both of them quiet in a way that held grief and closure together at once. In the seasons that followed, it was Yetunde who took up her father's ledgers, checking every column twice the way he'd taught her, once for the numbers, once for the pattern the numbers were trying to tell. The village never again let a single man hold both its trust and its silence unquestioned, and the community elders, chastened by how close they'd come to burying the truth alongside an innocent man, began appointing two officiants to every rite. From then on, neither one ever left alone with the dead. He waited for you, her mother said softly. Out of everyone in that compound, he waited until you were the one asking the right questions. He didn't wait for me, Yetunde said. He waited for someone brave enough to keep digging after everyone else wanted to stop. I just happened to be the one who couldn't. Truth buried on a deadline doesn't disappear, it only waits, patient, unsettled, refusing to rest, for someone willing to dig at exactly the moment everyone else has decided it's easier to stop looking. Isanya had nearly buried an innocent man's guilt twice over that day, first in Lanre, then in Kunle, simply because certainty arrived faster than proof ever could. It was only the one person unwilling to let the sun decide the truth for her who kept the village from burying the wrong story alongside the right man. If this story kept you glued from the very first second to the very last, don't let it end here. Subscribe, drop a comment telling us who you suspected first, and hit that like button so more stories like this find their way to you. Because in Isanya, they still tell this one differently than every other funeral song. They tell it as the night the dead refused to stay quiet until the living finally listened.